So let's talk about the giants of the faith. When I was in college around 20 years ago, this started getting passed around. Now, remember, this is before the internet. Getting a book in a smallish southern town of around 20,000 people, especially a book about Christian faith, Amazon wasn't out yet. Like literally, this was pre-Amazon. You'd have to get the Christian book distributor catalog sent to you in the mail. Have a credit card, which also, remember, people didn't really have credit cards back then, so maybe write a check or borrow someone's credit card and give them cash for it. Order this book and wait weeks for it to show up. These things were really, really special, but a guy named Chris Larson had started discipling people one-on-one, and one of the prerequisites for you to be in this discipleship loop with him was for y'all to be reading A.W. Tozer's Pursuit of God together. And this is my copy from 20 years ago. Funny story, I actually had a friend spec ops mission to go into an ex-girlfriend's house to get this copy back for me ages ago. Yeah, totally not joking about that, because it went all over the place. This copy of this book, it traveled overseas with me. It was my companion through a rough season of life that formed the foundation of the strong and healthy faith that I have now. And so this was heavy. These words of A.W. Tozer's here in Pursuit of God were really formational for so many of us in our faith. In fact, the band I was working with as we were doing leading worship all across the southern United States ordered a whole case of these things and would sell them at our merch table for cost because it was so hard to find a copy. But A.W. Tozer was my entry into these giants of faith, that great cloud of witnesses, the language of some folks to use. And they've been with me for my entire adult Christian life, and they've been with other people for their whole Christian lives as well. We can't measure the influence that writers like A.W. Tozer, Oswald Chambers, Andrew Murray, Smith Wigglesworth, John Wesley, the writings of the big revival leaders, all these sorts of things, we can't measure the impact they had on the Christian life. And in fact, I'm making this video now because I know I'll be making more videos about what does it mean to have and maintain a strong and robust, healthy faith. And for me, so much of that is writers like this. Giants, I tell you. And a few years ago on vacation, me and my dad were sitting out by a fire and we were talking about things like this. I was asking Dad, like, hey, why do you think that they seem to have just this depth of spiritual experience that's so much larger than what many of us would have it? And Dad literally was like, they had time. They had time to read. They had time to pray. They had time to think. They had time to process. They had time to engage and interact with God and all of those things. And so that sent me down a rabbit trail of the biographies of these sorts of writers to learn about that very same thing. So when we read types of writing like this more, I would say modern, but not really for the most part, it's stuff that happened in the last 200 years or so. If anything, I really do think it creates a type of faith that is deeply experiential and deeply personal. And it's been monumental to me keeping my faith and just how I've grounded myself inside of historic Christianity in spite of all sorts of other things, both good and bad. And so what I want to share with you are my top 5 favorite devotional type works that I think you should read. So the first one obviously is this right here, A.W. Tozer's Pursuit of God. He wrote the first draft to this book on an overnight train from Chicago to Dallas. Literally got on the train, ordered toast and tea, and sat down and got to Dallas and had the first manuscript for this in hand. I mean, if you don't want to talk about what does it mean for the Holy Spirit to like do a massive brain dump inside of you, like this book is a great story. But I think you should read this. It's a little complicated. I'm going to talk about it in some of these books. The language is old. Like this is normal, everyday kind of writing for people back when these things were written. But like we're used to memes now, or TikTok videos. Our minds struggle to comprehend like this, but it's worth it. So the first one, it would be this: 80 Tozer's The Pursuit of God. The second one is this particular version of the complete works of E.M. Bounds, his complete works on prayer. E.M. Bounds was a Methodist pastor in the 19th century, and he wrote so much about prayer. He wrote a bunch of smaller books on prayer, and you can get it now in a like one volume copy. Now, what I recommend about this one is the language has been updated into contemporary English, so it's easier to read. Short chapters, the kind of thing you can do a chapter a day for probably, I think, 6 or 9 months. Maybe, and you can get through the whole thing, but it is just a fantastic work on prayer. In fact, I actually have multiple copies of this book because I want to keep a clean copy to make Xerox copies out of for people when I'm in like a one-on-one discipling relationship with them. It's seriously that good. But E.M. Bounds' complete works on prayer. The third one is this: Andrew Murray's The Masters in Dwelling. Now, Andrew Murray is known for writing about prayer. He was a South African pastor, and the book of his that I love the most, I read it a couple of years ago, like 4 times in a row, but it wasn't about prayer. It was about the presence of God. This thing that over the last couple of years, I just have this insane fascination with. But he has a chapter in The Masters in Dwelling called Dead to Christ. That was one of the most changing things that I ever read and thought about holiness, and about sanctification, and about the deepening Christian life. I've not found an updated language version of this. You can actually find it for free on the internet, or you can order a copy off of Amazon. I'll have a link to all these below as that. The fourth one is this: Oswald Chambers' Abandoned to God. Fun fact, Oswald Chambers actually never wrote a book. Now you might be thinking, Chad, but what about My Utmost for His Highest, My Grandmother Has, or this, or this, or this? Oswald Chambers never wrote a book. But his wife Biddy was an expert stenographer, and he taught constantly. And from the moment they were married until the moment he died young, he was like around my age, died of appendicitis in a British camp during World War I in Egypt. Every single time he taught or said a word, his wife took a complete note of it. And so she compiled My Utmost for His Highest first. And then every other book that you see that says written by Oswald Chambers, Biddy took that from all of his notes. But Abandoned to God's interesting because it's a biography. And in this biography are his journals, his prayers, his poems, these sorts of things. But I'll tell you, that biography, Abandoned to God, there have been so many times, I've probably read it 6, 7, 8 times, but whenever I feel like I need a fresh injection of the Holy Spirit because something new is going on in my life where I know I need to be paying attention to it, I read that biography, and it has this way of like jump starting into me. The fifth book, I'm going to kind of break a rule here, but it's The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. This was not written in the last couple hundred years. This was written probably 500 or 600 years ago. This is an old book, but I need to go show the version because there's a specific version you need to get if you're going to grab it. So Paraclete Press has an entire set of classic devotional writings that have updated language, because I'll tell you, I've got a couple of copies of The Imitation of Christ, but whenever I try to read any of them besides this one, I just have to concentrate so much on reading it, it's difficult to do devotionally. But this book is it's super accessible in this modern updated language version. But folks like John Wesley and George Whitefield, all these great revivalists of the 17th and 18th century, point to this book being massive in their own personal journeys. And I've read it twice as part of my devotional life, and I have to tell you, it is just strong. So my 5 most recommended books on the devotional life by these giants of faith, spiritual giants. And I'm gonna do another video and a couple more videos probably about the devotional life lately. And there will have to be just more content about that at a later date. But I'm Chad. If you enjoy content like this, do me a favor, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. Let me know that you like this more devotional stuff and resources for the devotional life. Because like I said, I think I'm gonna be talking about this a lot more over the next couple of months, because I think the devotional life is significantly more important than we want to give it credit for, especially in our current cultural moment. But until the next video, I'm Chad, and I will see you later.